millions, and we will be. Because it starts right here.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Naptown People's Radio, a new podcast brought to you by the Indianapolis branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm your host, Derek Ford, and I'm here with my co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
We're excited to bring you this new weekly podcast to our people in the city because there are very few news outlets covering local issues from the perspective of the city's working and oppressed. While we have the Indianapolis Liberation Center and IndyLiberationCenter.org, its newspaper, which brings original news and analysis from the various groups and volunteers that comprise the center, we want to open a new avenue for politics to cut through the fog of the mainstream press and the dominant ruling class parties.
In Naptown People's Radio, we'll get to the reality of the issues facing people in Indianapolis, spotlight the stories that go untold by dominant media, and more. Through various segments, including our Naptown Breakdown, dispatches from behind the wire by our comrade Shaka Shakur, Circle City shoutouts, and interviews with those on the receiving end of police terror, as well as artists, cultural workers, and organizers working to change our city on a daily basis. Most importantly, we aren't just talking about the news, we're making it happen.
For this first episode, however, we're going to focus exclusively on the struggle against police terror because we're currently building with the family of IMPD's first victim of 2025, Adam Sykes, or AJ Sykes, as well as the family of Eric Taylor, one of the victims from 2023, which, Dani, I believe was like the most deadliest year in IMPD killings in history.
Absolutely, yeah. So 18 people shot by IMPD that year, 10 of them killed. All 10 victims were Black men. So yeah, deadliest at least in modern history, right? I'm sure there have been deadlier years, but modern history when they're actually recording the killings, right, was 2023.
Yeah. So could you talk to us a little bit about 2023 and like how that played out and just to provide some context so that we can understand maybe lessons that we can learn as we continue organizing this year?
Absolutely. I think to talk about 2023, though, actually need to go back to December 31st, 2022, and talk about Anthony Macklin, who was a young Black man at the time who was sleeping in his car in his grandmother's driveway. And grandmother didn't know who was out in her driveway because Anthony was in a rental at the time. So called 911, just wanted them to check, because, as a woman, didn't want to go out by herself and see who was out there. But in the 911 recording, you can hear her saying, repeatedly, "I'm not sure who's out there. It could be one of my kids. I just want someone to check and see who it is." Didn't say she was fearful or anything like that. Just like, can you check and see who's out there? And so the two police officers came, looked into the vehicle, saw Anthony asleep. He happened to have a gun on his lap, again, asleep, and they decided to wake him up by shooting him 30 times. So Anthony did live through that, but has $1 million in medical debt now, he's had 6 surgeries. One of the bullets was 1 millimeter away from his spine, all these horrific things that happened to Anthony. So that kind of just set the tone for 2023 was Anthony Macklin's attempted killing is what they were trying to do there. And then we get into 2023, and really what kicked off the killing spree was August 3rd, Officer Douglas Carell shot Baby G, Gary Harrell, in his back as he was hobbling away, essentially. From IMPD, they said that he was running away, but I remember speaking with Baby G's sister, Missy, his younger sister, and she talked about how he had a foot injury. So if you watch the video, Baby G is trying to get away, but he is not running
There's
away.
no way he's running, yeah.
Right. He's not running away. He is quickly walking into somebody's yard to get away from the police officer. And then he gets shot in his back. And, something that the interaction, if you watch the interaction, it was very strange. And you can tell, like, Gary realized for whatever reason that he was not making it out alive. So he started to try and get away and try and save his life.
Yeah, it's a reasonable thing. And I mean, the thing is that he was totally justified in doing so because Douglas Carell shouldn't have been on the streets in the first place as a cop. He really should have been behind bars. In 2016, he was accused of, and really, was guilty of a racist attack on a black man. What happened was a black man had been shot in the foot. His name was Joshua Harris. And it's about 2 a.m. in the morning. It was July 2nd, 2016. And so the neighbor sees this, calls for help. And so Carell and another cop named Linda something, I can't pronounce her last name, Roeschlein, Roeschlein, we'll say, responded to the call. And so Carell and his partner arrived, but they didn't listen to Harris, who was wounded on the floor. They walked past him and tried to enter his house. Harris cried for help. Carell was like, "Get the F out of my face." And Harris again cried for help, told the cops not to enter his property, asserting his Fourth Amendment rights. And that's when Carell attacked him. He punched him repeatedly, I think twice in the face. Harris fell to his knees. Again, he's been shot in the foot. He tries to stand up, and Carell grabs his shoulders and knees him in the abdomen, crushing his spleen against his spine. And so, Carell then arrested and charged him, unbelievably, right? Claimed that he had a clenched fist, whatever.
Adding insult to injury.
Exactly,
literally.
yeah. And then, a Marion County court dismissed the charges against Harris. And so rather than fire Carell, the city of Indianapolis spent $380,000 of our tax dollars in the settlement to keep this killer cop on the street so he could then go kill Baby G. So even if Baby G was running away, if he had a gun on him, I mean, that would be self-defense from my perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you are in the presence of a killer, right?
Yeah.
Or at least someone who wants to be a killer and then was given the opportunity to become a killer by the government here, city gov. So, yeah. So Baby G kind of, in this unfortunate event, sets off the, that's actually putting the blame on Baby G. Douglas Carell, August 3rd, sets off the killing spree. And then after Baby G is killed, August 27th, so just a few weeks later, we have Kendall Gilbert, who neighbors called 911 on Kendall Gilbert. Kendall was having a mental health crisis, was walking around with a machete. I want to say that IMPD had been out there multiple times. So we're familiar with Kendall. We're aware that Kendall was not actually a threat, right? If he had been a threat, they would have arrested him the first 2 times they were out there. So Kendall Gilbert was not a threat. But walking around with a machete, which, that can be very scary to people. I have de-escalated a situation with a machete. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a social worker. I personally was not afraid just because I knew the person who had the machete and realized he was, having a manic episode and was not actually trying to harm anyone. So,
you didn't kill him.
I didn't kill him. I did not kill him.
It's possible.
I talked to him the other day. He is alive. He's kicking it. He actually wants to start his own business. But he is a 6'3" Black and Puerto Rican man. And, I am 5'2", and I did not have a gun. He's alive. So there is a way to de-escalate a situation with the machete without killing the person. Just, not a flex or anything, but, it's a thing. It can happen. So Kendall Gilbert lost his life on August 27th because he had a machete and because IMPD does not know how to de-escalate a situation. Foreshadowing to October 26th, where Freddie Davis, also having a mental health crisis, was walking around in the neighborhood that he's well known in, and coming in and out of Burger King. Burger King employees end up calling 911 to, again, get Freddie some help. Freddie he had been homeless for a few days at that point, and so had been living on the streets, was kind of going through something. Burger King employees call 911, hey, can you help him out? They're just trying to serve burgers. They're literally trying to do their job while also trying to get someone some assistance. IMPD shows up, and in the video you can see, once again, they know Freddie. They're calling him by his name. Not even calling him Frederick, calling him Freddie, Freddie Davis. And they end up chasing him into the Burger King that he is no longer in, by the way, chasing him into the Burger King and shooting him. So not just killing a man and causing a family to lose their loved ones, but also traumatizing everyone who was in that Burger King that day. So that was October 26th. I do think we should also mention, Eric Taylor, who we are working with his family, and they've been amazing, was also killed in 2023, and that was September 19th. So just the latter half of 2023 was just riddled in blood that IMPD spilled. And the last one being November 30th of that year. And that was, I want to say, Leandre Houston was November 30th. So that was the last person to be killed by IMPD 2023.
The other piece to this, though, is it's not as if this was happening and everybody was just sitting back and watching it, right?
Right.
Because what I would say, Carell might have kicked off the shooting spree, but Baby G and his family kicked off the resistance.
Absolutely.
Because, so can you speak about that? Because I remember, of course, being there and being part of several of the actions around Baby G, and then later, once the Davis family got involved and more family members, and community members of those victims got involved. Can you speak? Because I believe that you were also one of the key figures leading that coalition at the time.
Yeah. So the Harrell family, Gary's family, wanted to, honestly, on their own, were planning to go to IMPD headquarters where Gary had been killed, or near where Gary had been killed. And so we were lucky enough to see the post, showed up, and just were like, hey, how can we help you? How can we show up and, be of service to you? And so that kind of kicked off that relationship, working with, Missy and working with her sisters and their mom. And Missy, again, that's Gary's little sister who he was super close with. I think he was pretty close with all of his siblings, but Missy in particular. And so working with them for months on end of going and trying to figure out how can we not just get justice for Gary, but also get justice for everyone else who was killed. It's not very well known, but actually the Harrell family and the Davis family grew up together, which is tragic, in the sense that they have faced so much trauma together. But I think, seeing them together and seeing them at rallies together, it shows that, even when, the oppressor, when capitalism, white supremacy tries to keep us down, we are able to band together and actually become stronger, because we're stronger together than we are apart. And so with the Harrell family, we were able to start going to the prosecutor's office. And we did that every Tuesday. We did that for months. And it wasn't just to like, because we had nothing to do. We obviously had things to do. We had jobs, and all of us were literally leaving our jobs to come to the prosecutor's office every Tuesday. And we were showing up because we were asking the prosecutor to do his job, which is such a ridiculous thing to think about. To show up to someone's job and ask them to do their job, do the job that we have elected you to do, because it's people like the Davis family, the Harrell family, who put him in that position, right? Mm-hmm. They elected him to be in that position. So we show up every Tuesday asking him to do his job. The first Tuesday, we were asked to wait out in the waiting area for him to come down. Oh yeah, he'll be down in just a moment. And so I remember we go out to the waiting area. The cops there immediately are hostile, and they're like, "You can't sit here." And
it's surrounding us. Yeah,
surrounding us, telling us we can't be there. And I remember myself, as well as Pastor Howard, were like, they literally just told us to sit here. Like, we were told to sit out here. And then they didn't really leave us alone because they just kept watching us, but they stopped talking to us at least. And so Ryan Mears, his employee, his lackey, came down and said, actually, he's not going to meet with you. You got to come back some other time to meet with him. Okay, that's fine. So we left, we came back, and we're told again that we cannot meet with him. We asked, how can we meet with him? Well, you have to meet with this person to make an appointment. Okay, can we meet with that person to make an appointment? No. Well, how are we supposed to make an appointment with this elected official? And so that kind of just started this, okay, well, we're going to be here. We're going to keep showing up, because even if you don't want to meet with me, even though I'm a concerned citizen and I pay
every right.
Yeah, I am literally paying your bills, right? Like, it's my tax dollars that are paying you. But you need to meet with this family. They deserve to have answers. You are supposed to be representing them, and you are not Ryan Mears. And so we started meeting there every Tuesday. At one point, I'll never forget, my Citizens app went off, and it was saying that we were there and we had the Black Panthers with us and we were armed. And I remember going back outside, and then we were surrounded by cops. There were so many cop cars out there, which none of us were foolish enough to bring guns into this building.
Right.
So I think they just saw a bunch of Black men, because there were a great deal of Black men with us that day. And there were some, I think there were 3 Black Panther members with us from Chicago. They came in from Chicago. And all of a sudden, now we're armed and we're dangerous. No one had guns.
Right.
For the record.
Well, I mean, if you just Google, you'll see that there's no, I mean, they would have arrested people for sure.
They would have arrested us, yeah. They would have arrested us if we had guns. But instead, they came out there to intimidate us and the family. And in fact, they did not. In fact, they just pissed us off more. So we continued to show up, to the point that they realized that the intimidation wasn't going to work. So they literally locked us out of the prosecutor's office, which is illegal, by the way. So.
Right. Seems like a violation of the First Amendment.
Yeah. I think we should have a right to see our elected official. Maybe that's wild for me to think.
I know. Maybe that's like part of the job of being an elected official. I don't know. Yeah. And then while this is happening, of course, the IMPD kills Freddie. Yep. And there's another struggle, right, that emerges to obtain the footage of his murder from Burger King, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember there's a very powerful rally November 15th. And I think that by that time, perhaps that struggle had already been successful in that aspect. Am I recalling that right? Or
no, that's correct. So we had been planning to have this rally, right? November 15th, we were planning to have this rally. Prior to that, we as in myself, and then of course Miss Davis, Freddie's mom, A few of Freddie's cousins and, other members of the coalition that we were in were calling Burger King, trying to meet with the people who owned that particular Burger King and asking for the footage. And we were kind of getting the runaround. I think some of that had to do with just like, business probably, and Burger King needing to ask the correct people. But we did let them know, hey, we are going to be holding another rally here, because we had already had one in which the staff from Burger King came outside and talked about how much they regretted, calling 911, and they were not planning for Freddie to die that day.
Because they called 911,
right.
Which you call because you need help, not you need to get killed.
Right.
Right.
That is the function of 911, to actually help us, not kill us. But so we were going out with the family, with his mom, with his cousins, and handing out flyers in the neighborhood that he was known in, and telling everyone, call Burger King, tell them this is what's happening. We need this footage. And we needed this footage, once again, so Ryan Mears can do his job. So this is not just Gary Harrell's family who is trying to get Ryan Mears to do his job. This is also Freddie Davis's family now, who is trying to get Ryan Mears just to do his job. And there's no telling how many people have tried to get Ryan Mears just to do his job. It was very eye-opening.
Or wouldn't even know how to go about trying to get him to do his job.
Right. Because again, we asked, how can we set up a meeting with Ryan Mears?
Yeah.
And told, I need to meet with this person, but I'm not allowed to meet with that person. So
if a bunch of experienced organizers and community leaders, right, aren't able to do that, they at least know how to start asking. And then you think about all the victims and their families who don't, maybe have those leaders in their neighborhoods or whatever, or whose, leaders aren't bold enough to do that, or maybe aren't familiar with that don't even know where to begin.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we had people, part of our coalition, who had been doing this for 50 years, right? So it's not like we were new to this, right? There was so much knowledge in that room, and still getting the runaround from government officials. But we were able to come together and okay, how can we, the people, get this footage for you? And we were able to do that, right? We were able to do that literally hours before the rally was supposed to happen. They finally got the footage to Miss Davis, so she was able to get that and try and fight for her baby.
Yeah, that's great. And that was actually November 11th. I got the date wrong. So it was November 11th was the rally. And I remember that rally. It was very powerful, not only because we had just had a victory, which are few and far in between, but, it's important to point that out that a group of people, regular working class, everyday people, exploited people in the city were able to do something that the cops could have done in a second, but just refused to. We actually were able to do that. That's really important. And
I think it's important to note that if the police had nothing to hide, right? They could have just gone in there and be like, hey, give us the footage, or give his mom the footage, or whatever have you. If they had nothing to hide, why are you not assisting us in getting this footage then?
Yeah, right. I mean, the same thing that, the rally for Adam Sykes was about on the 2-month anniversary of his murder by Grant Snyder on February 25th of this year, where he was shot and killed by Snyder, who, in the instances you mentioned, Snyder was very familiar, with AJ and had it out for him clearly. And they are, delaying the releasing the footage, which again, if you got nothing to hide, and so when they do release the footage, of course, it's edited. And in this case, PSL, along with AJ's mother and family and friends, were able to do an independent investigation and actually obtain doorbell footage with audio that clearly says one cop is clearly saying shoot him, right, multiple times,
right. And that was that was Grant Snyder's boss, right? Who was like, that was his superior, who was the one who was screaming
Ordering
at him to
assassinate him or
Yeah.
lynch him. That's terrible. And so that's where we are now. But what happened? That's it's a chunk of time in between. So if I remember the movement sort of culminated in a trial against Ryan Mears and the landlord in which he's housed, and we're going to be hearing soon from somebody who was a witness at that trial. But I wonder if you had any thoughts about like what might have, what could account for the movement sort of like fizzling out or dying down, or because it's not as if the people lost like their understanding of it. I remember Randall Taylor, when he resigned, former Chief Taylor, he resigned, of course, not in front of the press, but on a YouTube video, so he didn't have to face the people. Yeah. And so they wrote a statement that we read at a press release here at the Indianapolis Liberation Center. And I want to read the last paragraph because it clearly shows their understanding. It says, quote, "The problem with policing Indy streets will not change because Taylor is stepping down. The government is no longer by the people nor for the people. It is a government that preys on the people. Taylor stepping down will not solve the systemic problem. Looks like it is on us," end quote.
I think, first off, that's such a good quote and so powerful, and says that you don't have to be, and none of these people were activists, right? These were not, obviously, like myself and Pastor Howard and Elder Moja, those of us who were organizers and we do this, we're activists, but the loved ones and the people who have lost their brother and their child, those are not activists, and they have lives outside of doing this. They have to go to work. They have to sleep. In the case of Missy, Gary's little sister, she ended up homeless, right? So of course she wants to be out here fighting for her brother and getting justice for her brother. But she also needs a place to live. She has children. She has to feed herself and her children and her grandchildren. And there are going to be there's not going to be as many victories as we would like there to be, right? And I think, setbacks can be so, what's the word I want to use here? It can be really disheartening to get a setback when it's so clearly, like it's so clear, like you shot someone in the back. Yeah. Like, what are we discussing?
Right.
He didn't have his gun. He didn't shoot at you. He got shot in the back. And we're debating if this person should be convicted of murder or not.
Actually, we were debating whether they should be tried for murder.
Right.
Unbelievable, right?
Right. Not even if they should be convicted, but just if they should be tried.
If they should face any consequences whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because Carell this entire time was on paid vacation.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
If I went into my therapy office and shot someone in the back, I would lose my license. I would be in jail. I would lose custody of my children, right? There would be repercussions.
Like
for
immediately.
My actions. Immediately.
There would be no grand jury probably, right?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. The person was shot in their back. There's nothing to discuss.
Yeah.
That's not self-defense. Yeah. They're not even facing you. And, I personally have not been in that position. I will say, Freddie Davis in particular hits home for me because I didn't know this until I got to the first rally, but I was there and my niece's mom was there. And I was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And as she's literally crying, she's like, that was my cousin. And so Freddie Davis, all of them hit home, but Freddie Davis in particular, that's my niece's cousin, and which just shows like how connected we all are, but it can get overwhelming. It can get tiring. And so no one has given up on their loved ones, right? They just are tired. And also the way that the city is, it tries to keep people disconnected from one another. And it's hard to continue doing the work when you feel like you're alone also.
Right. And of course, you also have a job. I have a job.
Yeah.
Like the organizer, it's not like we, nobody pays us to do this too.
No.
So it's hard to keep that momentum. But I think you're right. Yeah, it definitely hasn't. There might be a low tide, but the same water will turn into a high tide again. And
Absolutely.
that's what we're trying to do right now. Yeah. So thank you so much for that context and that background. That's really helpful. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be joined by one of the witnesses to the court case that we talked about earlier. And you're listening to Naptown People's Radio, coming to you from our studio at the Indianapolis Liberation Center.
Socialism is the people. You're afraid of yourself. If you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself.
Welcome back to Naptown People's Radio. I'm here with Aubrey Whiteman, a full-time nursing student and an organizer with the PSL Indianapolis, who is also heavily involved in the police brutality struggle that culminated in a lawsuit against Ryan Mears. Welcome, Aubrey.
Thanks, Derek.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the reasons, the grounds for the lawsuit against Mears, and I believe also the landlord?
Absolutely. So for a few months, I was meeting with a group of community members, religious leaders, organizers, and then the families of the police shooting victims themselves, who had been attempting to meet with Prosecutor Ryan Mears for months to express their concerns and grievances about not holding cops who were shooting all these black men in Indianapolis, cops like Douglas Carell. They weren't holding them responsible. The prosecutor, he started off denying individual families who looking for support turned to community, and the community with these families would go into the prosecutor's office asking for a meeting. That was met with multiple consecutive and weekly refusals and denials, ultimately resulting in the selective locking of the prosecutor's doors. So the prosecutor started locking us in the office, and the reason that the private company is involved is that East Marketplace LLC houses the prosecutor's office. And so there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of people denying responsibility, saying that they weren't the ones responsible for the doors being locked. And so left with no other option, we pursued a lawsuit against both of them.
Yeah, it seems to me a bit problematic that a publicly elected representative maintains an office in a private building. I mean, isn't that part of being elected? Is that you are a member of the public and accessible to the public?
That's certainly what we believed. We elect you in the office for a reason. It's to do your job, and it's to be accessible to us when we need you. And week after week, he was denying, the staff was denying, and then the building security officers as well were all working together to make sure that these families were not able to meet with Ryan Mears.
And again, that's also important. All they wanted to do was have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Now, you said that they were selectively locking the doors. Now, did you have proof of this beforehand, or did this come out during the trial?
So at first, we weren't really sure because we're all working class people. We would meet up around lunchtime. We would go. Sometimes the doors would be locked. Sometimes we would be escorted out of the building after being denied the meeting. But more and more frequently as time went on, when we would show up, we would congregate outside, waiting for each other, making sure we all got there safely, waiting for all the families to get there. And by the time we'd walk in, the prosecutor's office would be locked. So acting on our suspicions, I ended up going into the building early, alone. I was relatively new to working with the group. My face was not as well known. And we decided just to record in the lobby, which we are allowed to do, and see what happened. And what was really, really interesting is when our group started congregating around the doors, waiting for people to get there, the building security officer, Ray, blocked the door, just as we suspected, went back to talk to his sergeant buddy employed by the building, I believe, or by the prosecutor's office, doesn't really matter. But he's like, did you get the door locked, Ray? Because here they come. And Ray's like, absolutely. And that's all on film. That was submitted into evidence. So yeah, we had proof.
And did any additional proof come out during the course of the trial?
Now, the trial was really entertaining. I don't know if that's the right word, but like I said, there's been a lot of denying, responsibility, trying to get out of being held accountable for this. And so, in short, Ryan Mears was subpoenaed, and he was supposed to come to trial. About 2 hours maybe before trial starts, he files a petition to quash. So basically, he thinks that this case should be thrown out. The judge denied that petition, but Ryan Mears didn't show up anyway, and we had to reschedule the date.
And did the judge have to file obviously not a bench warrant, although he could have, but a subpoena?
So instead of subpoenaing Ryan Mears, who, again, we elect to represent us and work for us, the judge decided that Ryan Mears himself was probably too busy to spend the time to come to this lawsuit. Again, just to meet with these families. It's the only reason we're having the lawsuit, is so that these families can meet with the prosecutor. Instead, the judge elected that as long as Ryan Mears basically appointed someone who could speak with the authority of his office, that person could come in his stead. That person ended up being Salida Scott.
Okay. And I mean, throughout the testimony and the examinations, the cross-examinations, was anything further revealed or further confirmed?
Yeah. So Salida Scott spent the most time on the stand. Again, not a lawyer, don't know all the legal words, but she was up there answering questions the most. And she tried every single tactic to skirt around who was responsible for locking the door. And so she denied it, 7 ways to Sunday, but it turned out that she did give standing permission to her staff to lock the door if they were understaffed, which is, that's reasonable, or if they felt intimidated. And so I guess our group of grieving families were very intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to me because I was at several of these weekly attempts to meet with Mears, who's too busy, I guess, hiding from the people who elected him to do anything. And I guess that the only thing that maybe they construed as intimidating was the fact that many people were black and young black men in particular.
Yeah.
Because there was never any aggression at all. I mean, even refusal upon refusal was met by like the religious leaders, the community leaders, our leaders, with understanding and respect. There was never an escalation. There was never any act of violence or threat or anything like that.
No, we're just community coming together to support grieving mothers and fathers who are actively sobbing in their lobby, like any human with any shred of respect for their constituents would come and at least meet with them. But he didn't.
And so what was the ultimate outcome of the trial?
So something really interesting happened towards the end of the trial. That the officer of the sheriff's department, he was put on the stand. This is Sergeant Wells. Sergeant Wells, I believe, was the last person on the stand, and he actually testified that it was policy to have the doors locked. And in fact, it was Salida Scott herself who authorized this door being locked in response to our group coming. So with that, the judge ruled ultimately not in our favor all the way, which is unfortunate because we do feel that our constitutional rights to, meet with our publicly elected officials were violated. But the judge also ruled that Prosecutor Ryan Mears was expected and required to meet with these families.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a victory. And this was after, I think the first weekly event was sometime in maybe September, middle of September.
It went on for a really long time, like 6, 7, 8, 9 months.
That's just something in itself. And Ryan Mears is a Democrat, of course. So this is not some Trump MAGA person, right? This is a Democrat, who spoke at the, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, was happy to speak at that rally, but went through all of those lengths to avoid a simple conversation, and only had it because a judge required him to.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what are his actual motivations? Who is he actually loyal to? And when he comes and speaks about these things that sound so popular, is that what it is? Is that just a popularity stunt? Is that for the media? Because clearly when it comes time to taking accountability and having these hard conversations, he wants no part of that.
Well, thank you so much for informing me and our listeners, Aubrey. It's affirming that despite the fact it took so long, it ended up being a victory, and it's unfortunate that the news outlets didn't really cover this at all. So I guess that's one last question for you is do you have any reason why, and, any thoughts as to why they didn't cover this?
Well, I think when you really think about it, you have to think about, who employs the media. And when you're thinking about that, and who also employs the cops and who employs other state officials. And obviously Ryan Mears is elected, but he does serve an agenda of his own and representative of the ruling class. And so when you think about all these pieces independently, maybe it doesn't make sense because this is news. Obviously, we're sitting here talking about it. But these major news outlets, they do rely on somebody to pay those paychecks. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, those are the same people who Ryan Mears feels that he has to protect and who the cops serve, which is the ruling class.
Well, that makes sense to me, unfortunately, and that's something that, at Naptown People's Radio and the PSL in Indianapolis, we're dedicated to changing. So thank you again, Aubrey, and after a short break, we'll be right back.
Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people, and we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people.
Welcome back to Naptown People's Radio, where we thread the struggles facing our people here in the city, through the country, and across the globe. So we just heard from Aubrey Whiteman, who was a witness for the court case that we had against Prosecutor Mears. And she's dope. Aubrey's amazing. So loved hearing from her. I kind of wanted to talk about and get into, we talked about 2023. I was not a part of the PSL during 2020. So I know that you were here, you were part of the movement, Derek, and if you could kind of shed some light or kind of thread that needle on, what is the difference between 2023 versus 2020, and how can we bring some of that momentum to 2025?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one that we can only really answer collectively. So, and this, whatever I say will be a collective response, because it's not as if I'm just thinking about this. It's because of the years that have been passed and all the discussions that we've had and the assessments. Working with within the PSL, within the center, with the different groups. 2020, the nationwide uprising against what we call the War on Black America was really historic. It was the most militant, widespread, largest nationwide struggle against really police terror in this country's history. It was also the most multinational, multi-generational. There were people of every race, age, gender, sexuality, every identity out in the streets, united for one cause. And for so many people, it was their first time in the streets. I'll never forget one experience actually where there was a lull in the chanting, and I remember just seeing a young woman out of the corner of my eye, and she just she says something, she says a chant, everybody, just chants it back immediately. And I just remember seeing the feeling in her face, the excitement and the enthusiasm of being wow, this is me, this is she's experiencing her own power, the power of the people united. And that kind of, that's necessary for people, because it's not we go from everything is fine one day to the next day there's a bunch of people in the streets, Right. And of course, 2020 really started in Indianapolis, right? That in May when between May 6th and 7th overnight, the IMPD shot, they shot and killed 2 people, and then they ran over and killed 2 other people. So they shot and killed Drejon Reed and Mikhail Rose, 2 young black men, and then they ran over Ashlyn Lisby, a young white woman. And I say they killed 4 people because she was pronounced dead at the hospital, but she was pregnant. Her baby was delivered and then died shortly after. And so we were in the streets that night, actually, as soon as Drejon Reed was killed. We were there until, the cops left his body out. We were there until they took his body away, and, people went home. We were back there the next day with our sound system because we had been, building connections with people there. And then, that was really amazing because, again, it's just everyday people in their neighborhood, and they kept protesting, and we forced Randall Taylor to come down there and confront Drejon's father and sister, which was, truly an incredible thing to witness, and, seeing him walk away. And of course, he's protected by all these cops with their guns pointed at us, from behind their cars, hiding from us, a bunch of unarmed people in the streets. And then, that entire summer was, it's important to see it, I think, as like a dress rehearsal, right? The protest is a kind of test, right? In which we test where the people are at, where we're at, where our, enemies are at, where people's consciousness is, right? Do our slogans resonate? Do our, is our messaging, behind the people? Is it, too far ahead? Is it sort of just right, to help guide it to the next stage, so we can elevate the struggle. And the history of struggles, it does, like we talked about before, there's high tides and low tides. And because people get tired, we have jobs. We can't, the point of protesting is not to protest, that's not why we do it. Actually, there's a million things I'd rather do than go protest, So there's a million things I have to do, you know what I mean? That then I have to make time for the protest. But, and then, I think 2023 was the fact that it was the absence of a nationwide struggle, of course, because really right now there is no nationwide coalition or organization of around police brutality, and there needs to be and there can be. And I think that that's where the grouping that we are working with right now, of course, Jada Trainor, her husband Jonathan, Jada survived a brutal attack by cops at Eskenazi Hospital. You can read about that at IndyLiberationCenter.org. Eric Taylor's family, as well as Adam's family. There's pockets of these groupings all across the nation. And I think really what we need to do while we're building this local movement here is to start connecting those other pockets, right? First with for support, I think. Yeah. And then for organized action. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we say it all the time when we're at these rallies, but we are stronger together than we are separated, right? And there's been movement after movement where that has been proven true, and the government likes to separate us or create chaos or all the things. I won't get into them today, but and that moment where you were talking about Drejon and just laying his body out for hours reminded me of when we spoke with Eric's mom, and she talked about how there was a neighbor who, Eric was killed right outside of her home, and she came outside to watch the police as they were handling his body. They had already killed him by that point, but she was out there watching, and the police, again, the police don't like when we are there for one another. They don't like when we know our rights. Eric Taylor was one who, his cousins and his brother, they talked a lot about how he knew his rights so well that he would make the cops look like fools whenever they would try to pull him over, kind of pull one over on him. And again, there's so many instances of the cops knowing the person before they kill them. Yeah.
But the defense is always like, I was scared for my life.
Right.
Felt threatened.
Right. You weren't scared. You know this person, right? So, but the neighbor said she was watching. They had put the tape up around her house so she couldn't come off her stairs, but she was watching, and she told his mother, like, they dropped her son. As they're pulling out his body, they just dropped him, and it's almost like we are not humans. We are not someone. Eric Taylor was somebody's father, right? That was someone's son. That was someone's brother, cousin, but more importantly, he was Eric Taylor.
Yeah.
And they dropped him like he was not a human being. And that is just, unfortunately, just a reoccurring thing that happens as they didn't care before they killed him.
Right.
But
that's, yeah. And, and that's the thing that's important for us to understand, because like the police they get the monopoly on the narrative for so long, which is why I think that the press conference was so important, and the independent investigation that, Adam Sykes' mother like led that, So that's really such a brave thing to do, because you're facing the most well-organized, well-funded gang in the city that can kill with impunity. Right. Yeah. And so that's like, that's no small feat, it's really a courageous and heroic thing to do. And I think we should end on that note, really, that like the people haven't stopped fighting back. Like you said, there's a low tide, but it's that same water that's going to bring the next high tide. And what we do with that is really, within our control. There's only so much that we can do, but the families coming together and speaking out, and, not backing down. And we're going to be there the entire time. We're going to be there for, as of now, Jada Trainor's next, the jury trial is scheduled for sometime in July. We'll be organizing for that. We'll be organizing with the Taylors and, with Nikki, Adam's mom, and others, right?
Absolutely.
And, eventually we'll win. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or I wouldn't be on this podcast if I didn't think that. Okay.
Cool. Well, that's it for this episode of Naptown People's Radio. If you found today's discussion useful, pass it on, leave a comment, and listen for our next episode to drop. The road ahead is long, but we walk it together. Study with your comrades, build with your community, and always remember, theory without action is paralysis, but action without theory is chaos. Once again, I'm your host, Derek Ford, here with my co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and stay in the struggle.
Trying to create a movement. We got a chance to do something in Indiana that brothers like myself been talking about for the last 40 years. When I first became political and we was organized behind the walls in the 80s and 90s, some of the stuff that we doing now with the different programs and the different institutions that we have and things like the Indy Center is things that we used to talk about and dream about doing. And now we doing them. See what I'm saying? We doing it. And we got to keep that momentum going, and it's also generation. So as the next generation come up, you know what I'm saying, it's on y'all to take it to the next level and take it to the next stage.
Salute.